Hi everybody, my name is Amber Dijon. I am a first year PhD student here at UofT, and Lauren asked me to talk to you all today about a study I conducted while I was an undergrad at Michigan State University. I did this study in collaboration with a health geographer, Dr. Amber Pearson at MSU, and then also in collaboration with three researchers from the Human Development and Family Studies Department. So let's just jump into it. So, just a little bit about me. I got my bachelor's from Michigan State University in political theory. I had an additional major in economic geography and a minor in GI science. At the time I conducted this study, but also like for most of my undergraduate career, I was working in a GIS department. So I was really into geographic information systems and mapping, which is kind of something that I got to use for this study. And then after my undergrad, I moved to U of T directly to get my master's in human geography, and I just finished that up last August, so August 2019, and I moved directly into my PhD, which is where I'm at now. So just before I get into the study a little bit, I just want to talk about why/when did I conduct this research. Basically, I was a geography major, and I was taking a quantitative methods course, which was required to graduate, and the professor kind of just announced that she was looking to work with undergraduate researchers, and that if we were interested in doing undergraduate research, we should contact her, which is what I did because I was interested in going to grad school. And we actually ended up applying for an undergraduate research grant that my undergraduate university, that Michigan State, which is where I was at, funded. And I think U of T has a very similar program, so just something for you to know, I guess, if you're interested in that. And we ended up getting funding. So I worked on this over the summer in, I believe, 2017. In Dr. Pearson's lab, and then we published it my fourth year of university, or we started publishing it. Publishing takes a long time. So that's kind of like why/when I did this. This project wasn't really, I guess, my idea. It was something that Dr. Pearson had been wanting to do, and so she kind of just asked me to help with it, and then I ended up doing the majority of the work, so that is why I am the first author on this paper. Okay, so just like a little bit into kind of the background of this study, and then also how it kind of connects to your greater course. So the study is kind of along this line of understanding how individuals use virtual environments or virtual communities to connect about mental health. And there has been a series of work done by non-geographers about how people use virtual or social media communities to talk about difficult subjects. So a study in 2017 by Barry et al. Looked at the hashtag #WhyWeTweetMentalHealth. So the researchers in this study actually asked people to use the hashtag to tell them why they're, using Twitter to talk about their mental health. And they ended up finding that people said that they felt a sense of community online, and they saw it as a space for expression and an area where they could get empowerment from other people experiencing similar things, and it helped them to cope with their mental health issues. So that was a qualitative study. And then in 2013, another group of researchers in Korea did a study of Twitter users with depression, and they were trying to compare how Twitter users with depression view the platform relative to people who do not have depression. What they ended up finding is that Twitter users who have depression view Twitter as a space for social awareness and emotional interaction. And this was different than people who did not have depression. They kind of just viewed Twitter as like a place to chat with friends, and they didn't quite see it as much of an emotional support system as Twitter users with depression. And the users with depression said that they felt less isolated and uplifted when they used Twitter to talk about their depression. So you can kind of see the formulation for why we wanted to do this study in part is that these virtual communities, these places where you can connect with people who aren't necessarily with you physically, are growing in popularity and importance for coping and connecting about mental health issues and depression specifically. But at the end of the day, we're geographers, right? If you're in this class, you're a geographer, I'm a geographer, and we care about place. And virtual communities kind of pose a challenge to geographers because they're aspatial in a lot of ways, and that you can connect with somebody anywhere. They don't have to be with you physically. So we also brought in an understanding of place that is founded in Cortona et al.'s 2006 study about community characteristics. So that what Cortona found is that communities that are lacking neighborhood amenities may have fewer destinations for social interaction. And I think that this one is pretty self-evident. If you live in a place where there are no public spaces, no public parks, maybe no libraries, places to go hang out with friends, you might feel like you have nowhere to socially hang out with people or, interact, which is kind of part of, again, the rationale for this study, which is that depression has many causes, but one of the causes of depression is lack of interaction with other individuals. So if you're living in a space where there aren't destinations for interaction, you might in turn be experiencing depression. So this kind of all feeds into the conceptualization of place in this study, which is that even though there are these virtual communities that are in some ways aspatial, people interact with them in a place. So when you send a tweet, you're sending that tweet from somewhere. And that's the geographic component to this study. So that kind of leads into our research questions. Can we predict Twitter usage to connect about depression based on demographic variables commonly associated with depression? Are there geographic differences in Twitter users seeking connections about depression? And what community characteristics are correlated with over or under tweeting based on our regression results? That's a mouthful, and I'm going to try and break it down for you guys. So before starting any study, you have to, assemble your data, especially because this is a quantitative study. So we needed a lot of information about the communities that the people who were tweeting were in, and then information about the demographic profiles of those places. So we compiled a bunch of census statistics, and then, through just a lot of elbow grease, we also found a lot of other really good data sets, such as like the location of museums, schools, where people were voting, basically where people were like, we wanted to find where there were places to go and where people were active in their community. That's kind of captured in the percent active voter. And then some of these other characteristics can be attributed to a vibrant social community, such as maybe nonprofits or places of worship. Vacant housing rates are kind of the inverse of this. Where there's a lot of vacant housing, we would assume there would be a less social or vibrant social atmosphere. So you're supposed to say your data sources anyway, so I'm giving them to you for, transparency, but then also to say that this is probably going to be, if you're doing any sort of research or study like this, data collection takes a lot of time, most of your time. So that's just something to be aware of. But moving into our first question, can we predict Twitter usage to connect about depression based on demographic variables commonly associated with depression? So the methods that we used, I know that I just went over data sources, but I want to talk about the tweets really quick. So we pulled the tweets from Twitter. It was a random sample. And for the study that I've kind of screenshotted and put on the slide here, they used the same data set that we used. This is a different study. But what they did, which actually came first, is they did a qualitative content analysis of the tweets. So they actually looked at what the people were saying in the tweets using the hashtag #MyDepressionLooksLike, which was a trending tweet on Twitter during Mental Health Awareness Week in June 2016. So they actually used something like 3,000 tweets for that study. But as some of you might know, if you use Twitter, not everybody geotags their tweets, which is to say not everybody provides a location for where they're sending the tweet from. So we actually had to cut down that original data set from 3,000 to 104 tweets, because only 104 tweets actually had a geotag, which means those were all the tweets that we were able to actually place somewhere. And again, this idea of place influencing who uses social media was at the core of our study. So once we had our tweets, we performed a Poisson regression, which is just a fancy way of saying we looked for relationships between where those tweets were, or counts of those tweets, and the demographic profile to address our question. So let me just really quickly, I wanted to show you guys a map of the tweets that we had. So you can see that most counties, these are counties, don't have any tweets. And that's not to say that there weren't any tweets there, there just weren't any geotagged tweets there, so we couldn't look at the tweets in those locations. But most counties had 1 or 2, and then some had in excess of 3. I think New York is the place where we had the most, which is 25 in a single county. So we took those counts, demonstrated by the map, and demographic variables related to depression, and we estimated the relationship between those variables with a regression. So, as you can see, being aged 15 to 44, female, or living alone had significant relationships with tweeting to connect about depression. White individuals and those living below the poverty level did not have statistically significant relationships. So I'm not going to get too much into the numbers here, but basically what we can take away from this is that the larger the proportion of a county's population that is aged 15 to 44 and female, the higher the tweets, or the rate of tweets, and then the lower the percent of single-person households in a county, the higher the tweets. So the first two have a direct relationship, and the third one has an indirect relationship. So then our next question moving forward was, are there geographic differences in Twitter users seeking connection about depression? So what we did here, this is really where the second half of the place issue comes in. So first, we took our regression results that I just showed you on the last slide, and we assigned tweeting index values that were based on the error from the regression model. So if any of you have already taken your quantitative methods course that's offered in this department, you'll know that regression models only approximate relationships, and sometimes they don't do a great job. An example of this would be if a county in our study had 2 tweets, but our model predicted that that county would have 5 tweets. So technically, that county is under-tweeting vis-a-vis what our model says that there should be there, given the fit of the model and the observed data that we have. So that's kind of what we did. So a TIV of 1 means that the county was under-tweeting relative to what the model predicted. And then a TIV of 2 means tweeting as expected, so the model predicted what we observed. And then TIV 3 is the model predicted a lower number of tweets than what we observed. So I hope that's not too confusing. And technically those are called residuals. If you read the paper, you saw that term being thrown around, but it's basically the error from the model. So then we took those tweeting index values that we developed from the regression results, and then we mapped them, and that's seen on your screen here, so on the right hand of your screen. And we were looking for geographic variation in the residuals, basically. So what you can kind of see is that more of the under-tweeting is occurring on the coastline, and then on the kind of the western side of our study region, there are more counties tweeting as expected. And then the one that really is kind of confusing here is that over-tweeting was kind of just random and dispersed throughout the region. There's a small cluster kind of in the New Hampshire, Maine area of over-tweeting, but otherwise most areas of overtweeting were kind of random. So then, moving on to our third research question, what community characteristics are correlated with over or under tweeting based on our regression results? We took those tweeting index values that I just showed you mapped on the last slide, and we performed a Pearson's correlation test between those TIV values and then the various community amenities that I showed you many slides ago that we went out and collected. Again, for those of you who have taken a quantitative course, you might remember this, but for those of us who are less familiar, on the left hand of your screen, I've put just a little example of what correlation tests are looking for. So if you have a correlation value of 0, basically there's no real relationship, and you can see that in that little chart in the upper right-hand corner. That's an R of 0, so that means no correlation between the two variables. But if you have a really strong relationship, either negative or positive, you'll see that the points become more linear. So as one point goes up, variable goes up, another variable goes up. So that tells us a very strong relationship there. Or a very strong, correlation there. But we can't really find anything else out from a correlation test, such as like, as tweeting index value goes up, nonprofit organizations increase by 10, just to give a random example. That's something that you can tell with a regression, which we did not do. We're just looking for trends here. So here's just a table of our Pearson correlation results. You'll see that I've organized it with the tweeting index values on top, and then the community characteristics are down the side. On the right hand of the table, you'll see our R value, which is the Pearson's correlation coefficient, and that basically tells us how linear or how cloud-like the relationship or the correlation is. And then you have your p-value, which is the statistical significance. So I've gone ahead, all the cells or all the variables that have color-coded cells are the ones that were significant at the 0.05 level. So as you can see, nonprofits are one of the most statistically significant Pearson relationships. So the p-value is less than 0.001, which is highly significant. It has a middle-of-the-road correlation coefficient of 0.23, and as you can see, there is a linear relationship. So communities that were undertweeting had a lower rate of nonprofits, and communities that were overtweeting had a higher rate of nonprofits. This continues for some of the subcategories, including human services nonprofits and public or societal benefit nonprofits. Something to note is that public or societal benefit nonprofits had the highest Pearson correlation coefficient of 0.24, but all were similarly statistically significant. We also saw a U-shaped relationship, and I've gone ahead and drawn your attention to the museums relationship, as this was the most statistically significant of the U-shaped relationships. As you can see, it has a somewhat strong, although not as strong as the nonprofits correlation coefficient of 0.2, but what we're actually seeing across our TIVs is that the average museum rate per 100,000 people for under and over tweeting communities were lower than that for communities that were tweeting as expected. So this U-shaped relationship is somewhat puzzling, but actually has been demonstrated in other literature. And you can see, I haven't highlighted it for you, but you can see that percent active voter actually has the inverse, where communities that were under or over tweeting have a higher average percent active voter than communities tweeting as expected. So just moving into some closing thoughts, wanted to give you guys a summary of all of the results in concert. So first, we found that there were correlations between demographic variables and tweeting to connect about depression. The statistically significant demographics were the population aged 15 to 45 and women. We found that having higher proportions of those populations were associated with tweeting to connect about depression. We also found that having a lower percentage of single-person households was related with tweeting about depression. We also found, for our second question about geographic trends, that there were some weak geographic trends to the dispersion of tweeting about depression. Along the east coast of the region, we saw a lot of communities that were under-tweeting, and then when you moved to the interior of the region, you saw more communities tweeting as expected. What was kind of maybe surprising was that the communities that were over-tweeting were somewhat randomly distributed around the region, with a small cluster in the New Hampshire, Maine area. For our Pearson tests that were looking at relationships between tweeting about depression and community characteristics, we found that there were a lot of U-shaped trends that indicate that some amenities or community characteristics relate to both virtual isolation or under-tweeting and virtual connection seeking or over-tweeting. But more perhaps interestingly, we found that the presence of nonprofits was strongly and linearly correlated with over-tweeting. So the more nonprofits there are per 100,000 people, the more likely that community is to be sharing more about depression online or seeking connection about depression online. And then some limitations and areas for future research. Um, the spatiotemporal scope of this study should be expanded, so that just means, moving beyond the northeastern United States and for a longer duration. Again, we only collected tweets for 1 week, and we could have had many more geotagged tweets if we were collecting them for a longer period of time. And we actually did have tweets for the entire United States, but because of the geotag problem that kind of comes from just the way that Twitter works, and then also like the small sample size that we had, the northeastern United States just had the most tweets, so we focused in on that. Additionally, a lot of other community characteristics might be relevant, such as crime. A lot of work has shown that crime influences whether or not people feel comfortable going out into their community, and that's kind of at the core of the study, and we didn't really capture that very well. I also think that if you look at all of the variables that we look at, like, that's how we're capturing place, but you as individuals, like, you probably have a lot of reasons why you go out into your community that aren't captured in this study. So, I mean, beyond parks, beyond places of worship, beyond nonprofits. And so that's just one of the shortcomings, rather, of a quantitative study is that it's a little bit rigid in how you can conceptualize and demonstrate place. So then moving into maybe like the last shortcoming is that we're not really looking at the demographics of the people on Twitter. We didn't really include any demographic information in the tweets that we included in the study, just because the demographic information is very incomplete when you pull tweets from Twitter. In addition, we didn't really look at, who uses Twitter more or less. Like, obviously younger people use Twitter more, so maybe that's self-evident that we'd have a correlation between that and then areas with more young people. I will say that other studies have not found differences in women using Twitter, which does indicate that maybe women are more likely to share their mental health experiences online than men, which I think in some ways is pretty intuitive, considering that women in general are more likely to share their emotions with others instead of men. In general. And then I kind of invite you all to think about what are some other shortcomings of this study, maybe situated against your other readings this week or readings that you've already done in this course. And I invite you to reflect on this question when you're reading any academic study. They all have shortcomings, and some of them are not apparent to the researcher. So this is really something that we as members of the academic community, but also you can do to really evaluate the rigor of a study. And then my second question is, can these results be repeated? In some ways, yeah, they can. You can pull Twitter data at any time using any keyword search. So you could easily repeat this study. You could do it now at the next Mental Health Awareness Week. You could use a different hashtag or the same hashtag, and you could pull the updated community characteristic data. Maybe you include crime this time. Maybe you focus in at a lower spatio scale. We used counties, which are quite large for a study like this. So maybe you want to focus in on the GTA, and you want to use dissemination areas instead, or maybe a different conceptualization of place. This study could be repeated in a variety of ways. Okay, so just a little bit of wrap up here. Just want to kind of talk about where I'm at now in my work, and then some final thoughts about undergraduate research. As is natural, I no longer do work really kind of like what you just read or what I just presented on. When I did this work, I was really new to research, and I really thought that quantitative approaches were the only approaches, and obviously since then I have learned a lot about other methodologies and methods that other researchers employ. So my work today is a lot less quantitatively rigid. For my PhD work, I'm doing multiple, or sometimes called mixed methods, which include qualitative inquiry, such as semi-structured interviews, or hopefully maybe using some photo voice or something like that. So I think that using qualitative work in conjunction with quantitative approaches help you really understand the subject of inquiry a little bit better. I'm studying social isolation, which is a kind of a nebulous concept in the literature right now. So I'm still in this space about social connectedness. I'm still looking at issues surrounding technology use and, ideas that were in this study about mental health. but I've moved beyond kind of the conceptualization in this paper. I focus more on older adults now who are at higher risk for social isolation. And I'm also incorporating ideas about mobility, just because transportation is something that I was passionate about, and studied in my master's. So incorporating these ideas of mobility, navigating your immediate built environment, and then also incorporating qualitative work is kind of where I'm at now in my research program. And then kind of just some final thoughts about undergraduate research. It was a great experience. I got to present this work at 2 conferences, one of which I've put a photo on the slide for you all. This is an undergraduate research symposium at my undergraduate institution. I also presented this work at the American Association of Geographers conference in New Orleans. So yeah, those are 2 really good experiences. They helped me figure out that I did really like doing research, and it was also something that I kind of had a personality for. Research is kind of an isolating activity, and it's very different from other types of work in that you're kind of just self-leading, self-motivating a lot of the time. And I think that this experience helped me figure out if that was something that I was actually built for. And it's okay if you're not built for it. Everybody has their own, needs in the workplace. I had friends who did undergraduate research who ultimately decided that it wasn't really something that they liked doing, that it wasn't really something that made them happy. And so they've opted to do professional masters or go directly into the job market, and find more traditional jobs. And that's just something that we all kind of have to figure out for ourselves, but doing undergraduate research kind of helps you figure it out before you get into a master's program. So if it's something that's available to you, and it's not always available, I recommend it if you have time. But at the end of the day, I think that it was a helpful thing for me, and it moved me ahead in my progression as an academic. So yeah, that's kind of what I had prepared for you guys today. I don't have any other slides with my contact info, but I do just want to say that if you have any questions about this study, or I know that you guys are doing literature reviews, so if you're doing a topic for your literature review that's kind of closely related to what I'm researching, I would be more than happy to chat with you, recommend papers, whatever. So my email is amber.dejohn@mail.utoronto.ca. It's just my name, so it's on the first slide. I'm also on the Geography and Planning Department's website, so you can go there to find my contact information as well. Beyond that, I hope that you guys enjoy the other guest lecture this week, and have a good summer.